Hello, my name is Jace. If you've been here before, you have seen that I have uploaded some speed paints and um, a video essay. Originally, I was going to write more and then just haven't had the time. Um, but today, I wanted to do something a little different. As you can see, I have a little VTuber right there that I had made in Blender, and I wanted to test it without having to stream. So I recorded a speed paint, and instead of um, just putting music behind it, I wanted to maybe do a little bit of an art process type thing, show how I go through. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit play here. I usually, of course, I start with references. I use a Dorkastock a lot, um, just because like it's a big database. I've been meaning to branch out into some of the other um, pose makers, archivists. I don't know what they call themselves, but specifically ones that a Dorkastock has worked with. Um, so yeah, I have my pose. I always like to modify poses a little bit from the reference, just because, especially with a Dorka stock, a lot of people use those same references, and I don't like. They're a good resource. I don't want my art to be recognized as, oh, that's the pose from this photo. So I always make at least one or two changes. And this video is going pretty fast. You can see I've already hit close here. I like to sketch my different layers and in different colors. It just helps me visualize the pieces more after and I'll go back and like erase what's underneath. And sometimes like, oh, I struggle with arms a lot, so I'll do those separately and then merge them down back onto that red layer, just to make things a little easier for myself. So, as you can see, I'm drawing Grell from Black Butler because I had accidentally gotten into the habit of just kind of like drawing her once a year. Oh, pardon the cyan. I'll change that in just a moment. It's a little eye strainy. Um, but yeah, I had gotten into the habit from like 2019 to 2022 of drawing Grell once a year. And it was just a funny way to track my art progress because my other stuff didn't have like a consistent schedule. And I drew her like three times in 2021 um, for a zine, and then hadn't drawn her since. So it's good to revisit. She's great. I love her. Needed to get back into the fun of it, um, especially since I draw lineless now. Um, I if you want to see the old art, some of it might be up on my Tumblr. I can link to that if I feel like it. You'll find out by reading the description. So this is still. You can see me futzing. I futz a lot. Um, but I think I try and get all of that out in the sketch phase. You'll see I play pretty fast and loose with things, even in coloring, but by the time I get to color, I like to have things mostly where I want them, which is why I spend so long on this sketch here. It's basically a rough line art at this point. Um, Obviously, it's not kept because I don't do line art. I don't like how my line art looked, so I just stopped doing it. And I like the shapes that lineless can bring, and I'll talk more about that later when I get into color. So you can see here, I'm now actually doing the face, and even though I've merged all my layers, I'm doing that separate, just because it's a spot of high detail. Um, I was watching Drawfee, as I do pretty much almost every day. Um, and Karina from Drawfee had said something about like her time at art school, or maybe it was Julia. It was Karina or Julia, saying like, "Oh, like don't or not don't go face first, but like that's an area of highest detail. It's what you're going to work the most on." So I've kind of started doing that last so I can get everything else how I want it without getting too in the weeds. And I'll be talking a lot about some different advice that I got from different art channels, Drawfee being a big one. Um, just because I've long since gotten past my time of how to draw X YouTube tutorials, but general art tips, those are still quite beneficial to me. So, and Drawfee is a nice casual thing. Um, and so even if it's goofing, but then there'll be like a genuine art tip in there, and I'm like, oh, I can use that. And then they have their draw classes, of course, which are great. I actually used Karina was doing one for anatomy and talked about the bean in the bowl, which I did at the very, very beginning of this. Didn't super have time to mention it. This is at ×7 speed, just to get it down to half an hour. But yeah, you can see that this is generally like the last, like, you can see this is a pretty clear cut vision. Um, Throughout this process, there are some gaps where I'm not doing a lot, and I'm either looking up another reference image, or sometimes I'll send things to my partner, who is also an artist, and see what they think, because I value their opinion very highly, and they have good art advice. Specifically, like we work well together. Of We were just talking the other day. I always said that I have strong concepts, but my execution tends to be where I struggle. And if there's just little anatomy things, or that they have a good eye for that. Yeah, see, so this is probably one of those gaps where I was looking something up. We'll find out what it was. That might have been when I first sent. No, because I fixed that. I think I'm looking up an image of a chainsaw here. Takes a little longer than I thought. Oh, nope, still messing with that. I did this yesterday, the day before. I don't fully remember everything that I did. But yeah, so now I'm really starting. Oh, nope. Aborted coloring part 2. Because I started it first and went, no, I still need to fix things. And then when it started a second time and went, no, I need to add a little tie, which I did. That tie is important. Known indicator of Miss Grell. I also apologize if it's a little distracting, the VTuber not completely syncing up. This is on top of being an art process, this is also a test of the functionality and a setup with face tracking. So I don't mind it being kind of jank, but feel free to let me know if it's too distracting. I love drawing hair. So Grell's hair specifically, this is not how I would normally draw curly hair, but there's a very specific vibe that I kind of go for with Grell. I have slowly honed like a more headcanon-y appearance for her over the years, and it's her hair is very specific. Like it's curly, but in a you know the curl pattern is tricky. So you can, especially when I get into shading, you'll see that I'm just kind of winging it, but I think it comes out looking really nice. I think this is the closest that I've drawn her in like actual clothes, because I used a lot of my fan art I used to draw like from memory, and I didn't reference outfits, which like is fine, but it's just funny to me that like this late in the game, this is probably the closest to her canonical appearance that I've gotten. I actually have a funny thing with the chainsaw too. that I'll talk about more when that comes up. But yeah, so one thing that I focus on, especially doing lineless art, is I focus a lot on color blocks and shapes. I actually have found that I tend to go for more limited palettes now, which at first, I would be like, oh, that's a little boring, but I actually really like how it looks. So, like, for example, even if something isn't technically the same color, I will use the same color for different areas of things that are similar but slightly different colors, just because I think it looks more cohesive that way. I've been telling too many stories. I need to actually talk about my process. So yeah, the color picking. I'm not color picking from any reference specifically, and one thing that's actually good to do that I do later, but I should have done before I even started slapping colors down. I like to put a nice neutral, like tinted 50% gray behind my flats because one, it lets you see your whites better. Two, depending on that tint, it'll help a lot with like your color relativity. And that's another drawfee trick I learned from Julia specifically. Um, Mentioned it on the link in different styles video. Was where I learned that. Yeah, I end up doing that 50% gray thing at like the very end just because I was messing with the whites. Um, One thing that I also like to do, I very rarely use a genuine pure white. I like the look of off-whites. I generally use pure whites for like a little eye shine. I didn't do that in this piece. I think I forgot. But there's that's pretty much the only thing that I'll use like a pure like Xcode FFF white for. Um, just because I find that like bright whites tend to be really startling in a way that I don't like. Ah, there's the chainsaw. So when getting references, I like if they have a background, I like to cut out the background as tight to the actual object as possible. This one was giving me grief, so I didn't. I just lasso tooled it. Um, and I'm not following it exactly. In my older pieces, I would essentially just trace the chainsaw, and that would end up kind of, I don't know, I'd have this super stylized figure and then not hyper realistic, but a realistic chainsaw, and it just wouldn't look right. Um, so I have the base here, and even that, like the shape is more realistic than I necessarily wanted it to be. So I ended up looking up reference of Grell's chainsaw, and I, didn't want to find anime screenshots for a canonical design, but I found this from a DeviantArt that I'm going to need to refind and link in the description. But I believe this is the official design according to a officially licensed wristband off of Amazon. It had the same design, so that's why I'm assuming that this is the official design and this is someone's cosplay piece of it. Um, so now you can see I'm not tracing, I'm simply drawing by hand the design there, but fitting it within the general boundaries of that more realistic chainsaw sketch. God, the chainsaw really does make me think like I've been working on Grell cosplay for years. I have the wig, I have the glasses, I have a corset that I made by hand to use underneath the dress that I want to make. But I have to make the dress, and that's expensive and difficult. I'm sure I could do it. I taught myself Blender, but expensive. One day, one day. Um, but yeah, I might use that chainsaw prop as inspiration for something. I don't want to copy it exactly, but maybe something similar. The magic of cardboard and foam. I'm gonna mess with this hand for a bit. there's I was trying to like mentally follow this really cool tip from Captain Harry's art. They go by a few names, and that I will also link to. It's like the knuckles look like little stairs, and I always that has helped me a lot. Oh, you can kind of I had the shape in there, so that actually isn't bad. It's just the perspective is off, so I erase it and start again. And I go for something a little more simplified. It's such a small part of the piece that it's fine. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of I don't have a lot to talk about process wise other than just I'm still one of the things is I'm still making changes. You can see I moved that eye up for proportionate. I'm always seeing things in the sketch even as I'm coloring that like need to be changed. So I'll change that on the fly. And that's one thing that I found really helpful is like being loose and not married to your sketch, which sounds a little hypocritical because I tend to follow mine pretty closely. But that's just because like I mess with my sketches so much first that they're what I want. Um, but like even you can see there I moved the sketch to make the perspective on that eye better. So don't be afraid to move things around. It's I feel like art's supposed to be quite freeing. Um, I wouldn't say this is like a huge thing of self-expression. It's Grell fan art. Um, but like the stylization and you can always make changes. And one of the things that it's a push and pull because I'm blocking them a little with my head here. Um, but I work with a lot of layers because I have flat blocks of color that sometimes I want to move around freely without, messing with other stuff. But that makes it easy to be looser with it and futz around with shapes and transforming and um, carving out things from you can see I use a lot of the eraser tool. I'll make a shape big and then carve it out little. Um, I like the subtractive method to a degree of refinement, I guess. But yeah, the downside to having so many layers, like for example, this piece had 52 at the end, which is more than usual. But I generally average at least 30. I don't name them though. I'm not that's a lot of time. Um, but it it makes the file really big. Um, it makes the file very big, and that sometimes Clip Studio chugs. Depending on your setup with your computer, it might not be that bad. Like this is I bought this computer used, but it's like a better computer than my old dinky laptop. So Clip Studio does not chug nearly as bad as it used to. But like on my old laptop I used to get like it would take 20 seconds to save a big file. And here, this is fine. I also work at a slightly smaller canvas size than I used to. I work at a pretty high DPI, so I don't find that it causes any issues. And this is still a 2000 by 1050, so that's pretty big to me. Um, it would just print small because it's a high DPI. It would be like a little over 3 inches because I work at 300. I just like the look of it digitally, especially for my website or my little portfolio site, because it shows up as like really big images that can always be scaled down. I like to work large enough that things can be scaled down if needed. Um, Completely different settings than when I work in print, though. So yeah, you can see the shading here. I generally go for single um, layer shading. Like I don't do multiple shadow colors. And you can do just like a big multiply layer for this, but I like to do specific colors. And that's something more recent. I used to do a multiply layer, but sometimes the multiply works great for like most of your colors, but not all of them. So I just started doing them all custom by hand. Oh, time for designs. Take a break from the shadows. It's time to paint gold. um, but yeah, so that's one of those where like that's not necessarily a tip or a specific way to do something. That's just what I like to do because I like that control over my colors versus multiply layers. I'm always adjusting. Um, like uh, doing the control U for tone correction. I simply prefer to use my little palette on the right there and slap down a color and then just slap down darker colors on top of it until I like how it looks. I do still follow the kind of rule of heighten the saturation, color shift the shadow a little bit. That comes into play more when I'm doing like a scene. It has specific color lighting. This is just a general. My light source has a direction, but it's not anything specific. My background here is going to be pretty abstract. So yeah, the one downside to how I did this shading though, I merged I tend to do details just clipped to the layer below, so when I have to do shading on top of that and I can't clip to the details because the details are already clipped, that can get a little annoying, but that's a hell of my own making that I choose to live with. Um, because I refuse to do it any other way. I would rather do that than have to worry about those gold edges not fitting into that red rectangle. Shadows be damned. One thing that I meant to talk about earlier and forgot was you can see I'm working pretty close up now, but one thing that I also have recently started doing, like you saw with my sketch, is being zoomed out for more of it, and that's just another aspect of trying not to get too in the weeds about your details. Like if you zoom in right away, you're not gonna pay enough attention to everything, and things will look balanced. How much time? I will say, in the past with the chainsaws, I forgot how I did them. I think I would like copy paste. I actually really liked doing that by hand, and I really like how it looked. So, I'm never against a good copy paste for repeating elements, but if it's something like really simple like that, try and do it by hand. Like, just see if you enjoy the process. I was pleasantly surprised. This was one of the first times that I did something like that. When I had drawn her chainsaw before, I had just done one tooth and then copy pasted it all the way around. It's less fun that way, surprisingly. That's sarcasm. It makes sense in retrospect, actually. Because one is doing something with my hands and the other is just keybind, keybind, keybind. Which I do have chronic wrist issues, so sometimes I do want something a little more mouse heavy compared to my tablet. That's why I have this little blender model. I actually really like, specifically for VTubers working in 3D. I prefer it to 2D because I can use most with my laser points, whereas making a PNG tuber, it's all, I mean, I'm pretty layer heavy, but like PNG tubers are, I'm sorry, not PNG tubers, 2D VTubers. PNG tubers are like the Discord reactives. 2D VTubers, uh, the layers are nuts. I've made one. I'm really proud of it. I want to do more. I liked the 3D one better, but also I work in low poly, so I'm sure those super smooth sculpts are a lot more finicky. And also I'm only doing texture animations. uh I'm a 2D guy at heart. I think it has charm. So this, you'll actually see me futz around with colors a little bit. So before I'd been using this like neutral gray to shade my whites, and that worked for like the teeth and the cuff. But here, it ended up creating a really weird issue with the red stripes. So I actually ended up changing like the shadow color for that throughout the entire piece. And I don't know how to get it to show up, but I had my little tone correction there. So I made that shadow a little warmer just to blend with the reds more. This entire piece is very red toned. I wouldn't say I work monochromatically, um, but I try to like keep, if one of the main colors is a yellow, even if I'm working in a blue, it's gonna look a little more green just because I like to put a little bit of yellow in there. So for example, everything in this is tinged slightly red. And I'll do more of that with a gradient on multiply at the very end as well. I did go simple for the shoes this time. I know that there are two colors on the shoes in the original, and I have drawn Grell in some very detailed shoes before, but this time I wanted it to be simple. The focus is really like on her face, her hair, maybe the design on the chainsaw, but I didn't. The pants and the vest are so simple that overly detailed shoes, I feel, would draw the eye away from where I wanted it to be. So that's one of the other things I think about in terms of like, again, I keep talking about like getting in the weeds, getting too into detail. There are areas you do want more detail, because those are going to be where the viewer's eye is drawn to. Generally, it's often faces, just because faces are very detailed things. Um, but I put a lot of care like into the hair shapes here and that, because I feel like that is like our secondary focal. So your eye kind of goes from the face down left to the hair and then down right to the chainsaw there. This part was a little tricky, because the shadow of the lock on her right, our left, but in front of her torso was mixing into the hair behind her. So I actually ended up darkening that whole section behind her. I didn't really want to, but I think the piece obviously looks better for it. It's cleaner. And I still futz with that a little bit. That's not the final colors there. Um, I thought it looked a little odd at first, like on this gray background here, but it ends up looking quite nice, I think. And part of the reason I do that multiply gradient later, over the whole body, also helps with that, and makes that a little more cohesive. Yep, there's that gradient. I also like to do, when I do gradients, I like to do an add layer as well, just to pop in some more color. And I don't like super dark gradients or super light ones. I don't like anything super strong, but I like adding, it's a little bit like an overlay layer, because I use add glow instead of just add, because I like the extra pop of color that it is. And I did do rim lighting for this. I don't normally, but I felt like it added one layer of dimension. So yeah, we're almost done here. I do futz with that sleeve some more for visibility reasons. The same reason with the hair, the shadows were getting melded into the shadows of what was behind it. So even though it would be more realistic for a shadow to go on the inside of that sleeve towards the body there, I ended up erasing the whole thing just for visibility reasons. And that's another thing, is like you can break rules of physics or light or whatever for clarity and visibility. That is one of like my big things, is like, I'll look at something, I'm like, this is technically correct, but it looks better if I do it the wrong way. quote unquote wrong. There is no wrong way to do anything, especially in art. Um, but you know, I especially with lineless, which is so shape heavy, I like my shapes to be clear. And if a shadow's in the way, that shadow gets to leave. I did do a green background because I have a previous drawing of Grell where I put her in one of those arsenic green dresses. And I thought that this would be a fun callback. And also, it's just a nice contrast. The pink was making her blend in too much. It was too samey. So that's another thing is like, I even though I was talking about, oh yeah, everything's got like this color tint to it, I often like to go for a contrast somewhere. So like she has the green eyes and then a green background. Oftentimes I'll make the background contrasting. Not all the time, but often. Or even if it's not like a full opposite contrast, I'll do something with it to make the foreground pop more. You can see I didn't like the color of the roses, so I'm futzing with those. And I like to use convert brightness to opacity a lot, but when I'm working not in black and white, I have to like copy paste over and over, or like fill in the back and alpha lock it. It's it's wild, but it worked out. I figured it out. It's one of those where like I have had to look up a lot of things on, or not look up necessarily, but just like if you're even if you're not doing a full drawing, sometimes it's cool to just like mess around in your programs and see what all the different settings do. I'm adding my signature. Excellent. So I did forget to add the final piece to the end of the video here when I rendered it out because I was having issues with that. So that was that. I'll pop a link to the final render. I did make some fix it in post adjustments and then forgot to put the image fade in at the end of the video. But I have recorded this and I'm not going back to re-record it because I go to work. But yeah, I hope this was, if not informative, at least a little fun, a little more engaging than just music. I don't know if I will be doing anything like this regularly. I might try and get into like some art streams. That's partially what I made this VTuber for. I don't know if it'll be regular, but if I do end up streaming, I will make a post about it. So I will see everybody when I see you next. Bye.